Hey guys, Blitzy Talks here. So many of you have probably heard of lifestyle creep if you've ever watched any finance video before on YouTube, but lifestyle creep is essentially just a bunch of costs that basically raise as you have more income or you run into a large amount of money suddenly. So, kind of things to avoid. First things to start is defining financial goals. So, definitely setting clear priorities, establishing an emergency fund. If you remember from my last video, talked about how important that was. About 3 to 6 months is what most financial experts recommend. For me personally, I'm a pretty risk averse guy, so I usually go for about 8 to 12 months, as well as any debt payoff. So usually you want to start with things like credit card debt or anything that really has high interest, and then kind of go from there. And of course, planning for things like retirement. Most people, especially in their early 20s, don't really plan for retirement right away, but it's highly recommended that you kind of set this goal at least, right now, and so that way in the future you don't have to really worry about it all too much. So definitely, when you make more money, you really want to use that money to the best of its ability. So definitely don't inflate spending. Really try to keep your spending definitely at the right level. Kind of how I do this is I budget and I usually take the average of my last 6 months of my expenses and kind of use that as a baseline going forward and try not to spend over it too much. Of course, for me, I'm really of the idea where you don't really want to deprive yourself of anything. So, if you feel like you're eating out not enough and you don't feel like you're restricting yourself, definitely, reallocate the budget to different areas. In my case, I'm not much of a foodie, but I know my fiance is a foodie, so I definitely, kind of accommodate for her needs there, and I kind of cut back on other areas like shopping. I don't really shop much, but I definitely feel, a lot of pleasure when it comes to things like getting groceries and eating healthy. So I move a little bit more of my money into groceries and kind of use that as a sort of a way to really stay sane with this whole thing. The next thing I want to talk about is automated savings and investments. So definitely treat savings kind of like a bill. I always try to pay myself first when it comes to getting paychecks. So I've personally used some automated saving techniques, but for me personally, just because of the fact that I always vary the amount that I always want to save sometimes varies. So I personally have kind of built the discipline to move money manually every time. But I know for a lot of people that's really hard. So definitely, saving money and having it done automatically is, really easy. It kind of is a hands-off approach that I think a lot of people should utilize. It's a really good way to start early, and then kind of once you've gotten used to it, you could start manually moving money. Granted, it is a lot of hassle and effort, so it's perfectly fine to keep things automated. Things like getting raises though, or getting bonuses. If you can, automate that part for yourself, whether it be taking a percentage from like your bank account, wherever it gets direct deposited into, and moving into an investment or savings account, really saves you the hassle, saves you the pain. It makes things really really easy for you. But at the end of the day, the key thing really is just to save, and if automating it is the way to go, I definitely think that should be something that anyone and everyone should utilize. So definitely avoid, upgrading everything after a raise. I know my personal experience is that I usually get a raise every single year. Very small amount, typically 3%, 4%. I know sometimes it's that's pretty large considering some people get nothing at all or even just 1%. But the one thing I definitely do every single time is I never increase my expenses. Again, I always try to keep a baseline, that 6 month average of spending I keep track of, and I usually keep that amount, more or less the same. Every year I kind of reevaluate though, just to make sure, if any expenses have gone up. I bought a house recently, of course, so definitely my expenses have gone up a lot more. But I'm kind of still figuring out how things work and what the average expenses would be like. But definitely, never try to inflate anything after you get a raise or any kind of bonus. The best practice is stick to your current standard of living for definitely as long as possible. If I could have, I would have definitely stuck around with my parents, but given my kind of sour relationship with them, and working full time, it was a lot of stress. So for me, I felt like moving out was the way to go, and so far I don't regret it at all. Granted, it's definitely more expensive, but for me, it gives me that peace of mind, which lets me perform better at work and do things like YouTube on the side, and hopefully it works out. But yeah, back to the main topic here. Definitely avoid everything expensive or increasing your costs after a raise. You know, Despite all that, though, definitely treat yourself here and there. I know I do every so often. Like I'll buy myself something nice or an item that I've always really wanted, like a watch or something. When if I get like a really big raise, for example, when I got my first job and I got a massive increase, originally I was making about 20 something an hour, and then suddenly that doubled. So definitely I treat myself to something really nice, but that's just a one-time thing as long as it's not consistently done every single time. So definitely focus on things that improve your quality of life. So for me, things like buying slightly better clothing that lasts a lot longer or slightly better shoes, right? Things like those can definitely save you a lot of money. You definitely don't. I mean, I'm not a big clothing guy or brand person either. I don't buy Louis Vuitton or Gucci, any of those kind of things, but I definitely do buy quality. I'd rather just buy it once and not have to buy it several times afterwards. You know, That goes for like again shirts or shoes or pants. Any of that kind of stuff. I definitely try not to overspend, but I definitely will spend on quality, and I definitely notice a big improvement. Another really good example is I bought a $5,000 mattress. Granted, I did get it on 50% off, so it's still 2,500 or give or take, but definitely worth the investment. I used to sleep on a 20-year-old mattress for as long as I could really remember, but after getting this mattress, I've had the best sleep. I've definitely noticed I have better focus, and I definitely perform better at work and can make better decisions, day to day. And I'm not feeling as tired as I used to. And a lot of my back pain, which is pretty crazy, considering I'm in my mid 20s, but I did have pretty bad back pain. But after sleeping on this mattress for a good while now, it's definitely improved a lot. So I definitely think it's worth it buying things that are really worth your improving quality of life and everything like that. But I definitely wouldn't go too crazy on it, but it is worth doing. Again, despite all that, try to stick to the baseline spending level. You don't want to go too crazy. The next thing I want to talk about is using your windfalls wisely. So by windfalls, I mean things like bonuses or when you file your taxes and get a tax refund, and gifts. Think of it as an opportunity, and not really a shopping spree. So in my case, I get a bonus every year. Usually it's about 5K to 10K, give or take, and now of course I get tax returns as well. For a long time personally, I never really spent on myself very much. Maybe I'll spend $50 or $100 there and here and there to get something I really wanted from it, but overall, generally, I always just invested it or saved it. That's a really big reason as to why I could even buy a home at my age. It was, I built the emergency fund early on. I got the habits down, very solidly down. And of course, I had a lot of money and cash built up just because, a lot of discipline was exercised. So really all of that attributed to me being, fairly successful for someone of my age. And I think everyone can do it pretty easily, but, again, it really is just a mindset thing. So using your bonuses or tax refunds to fund your investment accounts, to fund your emergency fund, or fund any of your long-term goals, really just kind of delaying, quick gratitude or quick, pleasure definitely will help you in the long run. I consider using things like the 50-30-20 rule for, starting out. Personally, I like to save, I saved about 90%, 95% of my income when I was living with my parents and kind of first starting to work. But, as you kind of get older, and you definitely don't want to restrict yourself too much again. So, kind of sticking to a nice rule that you can follow will definitely push you towards the goal while not making it too restrictive. You're kind of the average of the 5 people you hang around with. So if you hang around people that spend a lot of money all the time or always go out and splurge, chances are you'll probably do the same thing. So, now that you're entering your 20s, you definitely want to be very wise in who you spend time with and who you choose to kind of, hang around. So definitely don't fall to things like peer pressure, when you go with friends. You definitely don't want to be the guy that always buys the most expensive thing, or you don't want to be constantly just buying things just because you want it. Instead, you definitely want to do things like wait. For me personally, I wait about 24 to 48 hours before I make a really expensive purchase, or even something that I really felt like I wanted. Definitely that helps me kind of curb the cravings. I know it's really hard for some people, especially if you see like a really good deal. But sort of my mindset is if you see something 50% off, you're still spending 50% on something that you didn't have to spend 50% on. So, different little mindset tricks or different ways to view how you're spending on something can definitely change the way you actually save money. You know, Definitely I follow people that prefer, financial freedom over material display. My last video I talked about how my partner and I share similar goals of not having to work too hard and kind of want to retire earlier. So, definitely that kind of helps a lot when it comes to saving money when you have someone that's similar to you. Granted, that's not impossible for everybody, but at the end of the day, you can pick who you hang around with. So definitely pick someone that is on a similar path to you if possible. Budget early on, build a budget sheet in Excel. You could definitely download a free one online if you watch any of these YouTube gurus, or if you just want to go on Etsy and buy one, or even download an app that's free. But either way, start simple, start early. Once you know your spending habits, it makes it very easy to keep track of things. It's kind of like working out. If you don't keep track of your calories or kind of your exercise program and adjust it, usually, then it makes it really complicated to improve on things. You can't really track your progress. You won't know how to tweak things here and there. I know a lot of people that I help when it comes to personal finance, they don't even know how much they spend, and oftentimes when I give them a budget sheet that I made, they find that they spent way more than they originally thought and they saved way less. So definitely this really helps when it comes to lifestyle inflation. You really don't want to go too crazy, and this way you kind of keep everything in check, keep everything in balance. And it also feels kind of good knowing that you saved a lot more money when you can actually see how much you save and any kind of progress. It's now tangible. So in summary, lifestyle upgrades aren't necessarily bad, but they should be intentional. Kind of on that topic of intentional, the mattress that I bought, or, for example, I don't know, nice shoes, nice shirts, those kind of things. Definitely it helps. And at the end of the day, if you're like me who wants to retire earlier, or at least partial retirement earlier on, you don't have to rely on that 9 to 5 paycheck all the time to make ends meet. And it's truly liberating. Kind of once you've shifted your mindset towards more financial freedom rather than temporary luxury, it really changes the way you can manage money, and especially when you have lifestyle inflation as something that's really prevalent, especially amongst early adults. When you get your first big boy, big girl kind of job, then you start to make a lot of money, and most people tend to just splurge it like crazy because they know that they're going to get it again in the next 2 weeks. But really, once you have that mindset of financial freedom and the intentional buying of things, it really changes the game when it comes to personal finance. But yeah, no, that's everything for today's video, guys. If you really liked what you heard, please comment your thoughts down below. Again, I'm trying to make these videos a little more insightful, a little bit better, not trying to just regurgitating what everyone on YouTube says. But overall, if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe, please like, comment, favorite, share, whatever it takes, whatever floats your boat. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.